right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this very important Twitter space. Glad to have you here on a Sunday evening. I hope everyone's had a great weekend. I'm your host, Lori Spencer. Tonight we are talking about censorship and one of the most censored men in the world, 2024 Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is currently suing YouTube and Google, alleging that they censored him and his campaign. And of course, we all know that's true. I'm hosting this Twitter space because I have a personal stake in this fight. I'm a journalist, been a journalist for 25 years, 35 years now, goodness. And in my whole lifetime, I've never seen anything quite like it. I'm obviously, I love the First Amendment. I love the Constitution. I love a free press. That's why I became a journalist in the first place. And I had a YouTube channel for years where I just did, daily news updates. Never had any strikes, never had any censorship of my channel, even during the COVID pandemic. But just very recently, when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. entered the race, they started censoring my channel. Every time I'd post a video about Kennedy, it would get taken down. Then I got a second strike on my channel. They demonetized me. And then the third strike, all three videos were about Robert F. Kennedy. And finally, they just banned the channel altogether off YouTube. I'd like to welcome my co-host, Anita Stewart, who's a staffer with the RFK campaign. Anita, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fine. I just want to make sure you can hear me okay.
Yeah, you sound good.
Oh, perfect. Great. Yeah, this is a huge story, and it's been something that's been continuing since the beginning of the campaign, really. So,
yeah, can you tell me a little bit about that? Tell our listeners about how the censorship of Kennedy started once the campaign launched back in April.
Well, three of us started the Slack, the original Slack for the campaign. And I had put a channel on there early on when I was still a volunteer. And it was called Takedowns, because people were experiencing so many censorship on so many different levels. It didn't matter what social platform they were using, or whether they were on YouTube or Facebook, or just weird things were happening. Posts were disappeared. Of course, YouTube was just taking videos off. And so this has been going on in a big, big way since the very beginning. And this isn't the first time this has happened. When I worked with Kucinich's 2008 campaign, and I was doing the social networks, it was happening way back then too. And we were brand new using social networks pretty much for the first time in presidential campaigns. So we're talking 2006, 2007.
That's really interesting to me, Anita. I had no idea that censorship was happening even back then. What did they do to Dennis Kucinich's campaign to censor him?
A lot of times I saw polls go backwards. I would refresh my page and numbers would disappear and go backwards. And it was pretty much the same thing on YouTube. We didn't have a lot of social networks. Facebook wasn't widely used at that time. MySpace was a big thing. And we noticed that there was a lot of disappearing posts and a lot of throttling too, where you would be trying to make a post and the page would go down. Then you'd try and do it again and the page would go down again. Anything to not necessarily disappear, but to slow up the efforts, as it were.
Unreal, just unreal. I had no idea. I thought this all started in 2020, 2021.
No, it's been going on for a long, long time.
Very interesting. Well, we do know this. We know that one day after President Biden was sworn in, took the oath of office on January 20th of 2021, the very next day, we have a communication from the White House to Facebook, I believe it was, telling them to take down Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
So, the censorship of Kennedy started from day one. of the Biden administration, literally day one. And, that continued throughout the pandemic at different points in time. Facebook, Instagram, I think Twitter too, and YouTube censored both Kennedy and Children's Health Defense, which is the nonprofit organization that Kennedy heads up. Kennedy is now on a leave of absence from Children's Health Defense, obviously, because he's running for president and doesn't have time to do that. He's putting all of his focus, all of his time and energy into the presidential campaign, but he's still taking time to file lawsuits. And currently, Kennedy has, I think, five different lawsuits going. He's got one against the Trusted News Initiative, which is CNN, the BBC, several different news outlets who were vetting medical misinformation online during the pandemic, and they still exist. He's also suing Facebook, Meta, Instagram, suing the Biden administration and 100 members of the Biden administration, including the FBI, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, including the head of the CDC and the FDA and just about every agency you can imagine. There are 100 defendants in that lawsuit, Kennedy versus Biden. He's also joined the lawsuit of Missouri versus Biden, which of course is still ongoing. And we've learned a lot from that lawsuit as well. And then back on August the 4th, he filed this most recent lawsuit, which is the one we're talking about tonight, against Google and YouTube. And that's going to be the subject of our conversation tonight. We have an all-star panel lined up for you, in addition to Anita from the Kennedy campaign. And at some point, these folks will be filtering in. We've got a full panel of speakers. We've got Sarah. We've got Nick Brana, who's the chair of the People's Party here in the United States and organizer of Rage Against the War Machine. Several censored journalists are on the panel. I made a point to invite a lot of my colleagues who have been censored by YouTube to talk about their experiences. We'll have Rick Walker of Maverick News, my co-host of Maverick News and Strange Bedfellows, Craig Pasta Jardula, Yo Pasta, the Convo Couch. I think he can make it. We're not sure. He's dealing with some family business, but he may join us later. Jose Vega and Kynan Thistlethwaite of the Declaring Independence podcast and the International Peace Coalition. We also have another RFK campaign volunteer organizer, John Russell, former candidate for U.S. Congress. We'll have chair of the National Libertarian Party, Angela McArdle, should be joining us shortly. And, it's important to point out that it's not just Americans who are affected by this, and it's not just American journalists who are facing censorship on the YouTube platform. We've also got some journalists from overseas that'll be joining us. Republic Welsh, who's over in New Zealand, good friend of mine. Caleb Maupin, who's a reporter for RT, the most censored network in the world. And I believe that RT was the very first to be censored completely by YouTube worldwide at the beginning of the war last year. And several others will be joining us. Don DeBar, who's a reporter for KPFK Pacifica News and the Rebel News Alliance. We have Anastasia Battle from Humanity for Peace. We have Jay Sadler, who's the host of the Jay Scott Ascension podcast. And I think at some point tonight, there's going to be a special guest appearance by a certain ghost, someone who is so censored on this very platform that I can't even say his name. Some of you might know who I'm talking about. So let's get started. Let's talk about the lawsuit itself. And I tell you what, Biden had better start hiding. When I take a look at this lawsuit, I'm just going to read you, it's a 27-page complaint. I'm going to read you a few selected highlights to give you an idea of what this lawsuit is all about. And I'm just quoting here from paragraph 29. This is Kennedy's complaint. Mr. Kennedy says, YouTube cannot exclude people from the platform based on their viewpoint. It cannot decide which speech people hear. It cannot do that based on a public-private partnership in which YouTube relies on the government to decide what information to censor. YouTube had no obligation to act as the government's censor. But after the creation of CISA, and especially after President Biden took office, YouTube decided to partner with the federal government to censor dissenting voices about COVID-19. In this way, the federal government insinuated itself into such a position of interdependence with YouTube that they can be deemed joint participants in the censorship regime. That's quoting from paragraph 36. And I'm going to ask everyone on the panel, if you would please, to mute your microphones. It just kind of cuts down on the extraneous background noise. And that helps. I'm going to repurpose this into a podcast format later and post it across other platforms. So we want the best sound quality possible. Also, to everyone on our speakers panel, I'm going to ask you to please move to a quiet space where you don't have much background noise if you can. Make sure you're in a quiet room. And I'm going to move on to paragraph 38 of this lawsuit. It says, this partnership consists of a complex and deeply intertwined process between the federal government and YouTube, but led by the government, which plays an outsized role in the decision about what information is dangerous and which speakers need to be silenced. When engaging in this partnership, YouTube did not act in good faith, Kennedy asserts, to promote its own business, but to fulfill the government's objective of preventing people from hearing Mr. Kennedy's comments. It was fulfilling the government's censorship goals. It will continue to do that. Indeed, YouTube is the only one of the big tech platforms that is still censoring Mr. Kennedy during his political campaign. YouTube's decision to censor Mr. Kennedy's political speech must be deemed to have been made by the government itself, including Kennedy's political opponent, President Joe Biden. That's paragraph 40. Kennedy continues in his lawsuit, under these circumstances, YouTube is a state actor, and it violated Mr. Kennedy's First Amendment rights by engaging in viewpoint discrimination, as alleged above. Unlike other technology companies, YouTube has refused to remove its misinformation policies and has refused to stop censoring Mr. Kennedy during his campaign. It will continue censoring Mr. Kennedy, preventing his political message from reaching millions of American voters. Mr. Kennedy contends that YouTube's medical misinformation policies are unconstitutional on their face because they are vague and overbroad and give unnamed government officials, who the policies depend entirely upon, the unfettered discretion to decide what information gets removed from YouTube. Now, I should point out that Bobby Kennedy is seeking no financial relief in this lawsuit. He's not seeking millions of dollars. He's only seeking court costs and attorney's fees. What he is seeking is ultimately a court order requiring YouTube restore any videos of Mr. Kennedy's political speech that it has removed during the 2024 presidential campaign. And that would include creators like us who have had our videos about Mr. Kennedy removed as well. And maybe if I'm lucky, I can get my old YouTube channel back, which they banned simply because I was covering Mr. Kennedy's campaign. Mr. Kennedy also seeks a court order declaring YouTube's medical misinformation policies to be unconstitutional on their face and as applied to Mr. Kennedy during his presidential campaign. And he's also seeking an injunction prohibiting YouTube from further enforcing them. And I know several of you here on this panel have been directly affected by YouTube censorship. Some of you have been affected because you covered Mr. Kennedy's campaign. Maybe you did an interview with Mr. Kennedy and it was removed from the platform. And let me tell you guys from experience, this censorship began literally on day one of the Kennedy campaign. He declared his candidacy in Boston on April 19th, and the campaign had a live stream scheduled so that everybody could tune in and watch his speech. But moments after the live stream went out from the campaign's official YouTube channel, YouTube took it down, literally within seconds, which left journalists like us, myself and Rick Walker at Maverick News, we were covering it live, and we had no stream to broadcast to the American people. So unfortunately, that continues to this very day. And I'd like to bring in my co-host from Maverick News, Rick Walker. And Rick, if you could unmute your mic, can you hear me all right?
I can. Loud and
Good
clear.
to have you here, my friend.
Hello.
I would like to start with you because you are a veteran of YouTube prison. I've lost count of how many prison sentences you've done in YouTube. You are currently in YouTube prison for 2 weeks. Tell our listeners a little bit about your experience being censored by YouTube.
I wish I could be clearer, but it's difficult to explain how we end up here because they never really give you a detailed explanation. You just get a strike with a vague reason. So we're on our second strike in a 90-day period right now. Apparently, I'm guilty of hate speech, but there's no specific
What? What?
reason.
No.
That's the reason that they gave. It's hate speech. Now, the thing is, the video that was identified dealt with a swastika on a flag. And I don't know how you're supposed to cover a controversial issue without showing the flag, talking about the symbol. I wasn't endorsing it. I don't think I said anything that was hateful toward any person or group. But this also shows that it isn't just you. It can be a guest. It could be someone in your chat. They can ban you for something that someone else says or even texts in the chat room. And you may not even know. And then they don't tell you. So but that is my experience. It's murky. It's hard to define because they don't give you any real clear definition or explanation when they do these things to you.
That's right. And this is your second ban from YouTube, I believe, in 3 weeks' time. 3 weeks ago, you got 7 days in YouTube jail for merely covering the biggest story in the world, the criminal indictments against former President Trump. And
Yes.
you've had several bans in the past for covering the Trump campaign, for airing Trump rallies on your channel. Again, this is a former president of the United States. It's obviously newsworthy. It's the story that the whole world is talking about. Tell me a little bit about your history with YouTube censoring you for covering Donald Trump.
Every time he opens his mouth, we get
Right.
banned. That's the experience. It got to the point where I would run videos about Trump, take clips from his rallies, and then I would, after the show would run, I would immediately take it down. But after a while, they got wise to that, and they imposed strikes midstream while we were live. They just took us down.
They sure did. I was sitting right there when we went off the air a few times.
Yeah. So that's what's going on with YouTube. And, what it comes down to is it's very arbitrary. They just decide they don't like you for some reason. And then once you get on their radar, you get hammered. We covered extensively, as you know, Lori, the Freedom Convoy in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I thought all through that, I was waiting for YouTube to kick us off, but the channel kept growing and growing and growing, and they let it go. I was amazed.
Me too.
We got away with all of that because they had real issues with all the issues surrounding that at the time. But we got through that, and we went on for a long time and built the channel and didn't really have many issues. But it was Trump. I mean, it was Trump stuff that really got their attention, and it's been that way ever since. And now it's RFK stuff, and then it was COVID stuff and election interference. Anything in those veins. We have to speak in code now whenever we talk about COVID, whenever we talk about vaccines.
We might even have to give Kennedy some nickname so that we can't refer to him by name, but we refer to him by a code name so that we don't get censored. We may have to give Trump some kind of code name. This is ridiculous. It's absolutely crazy. The roadblocks that they keep throwing in our way. And we have to get creative to work around the roadblocks, drive around them, which is exactly why we're here on X tonight. It's why we're on Twitter. Twitter is literally the last platform left where there is any free speech, it seems, at all. And that's why I felt that this was best suited for a Twitter space. Rick, I wanted to also address the. It's interesting to me what's not censored, right? I mean, we do a lot of coverage of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And we have controversial guests on, like Scott Ritter, who's a regular on the program. And as we know, Scott Ritter's YouTube channel was just taken down, I think, last week. So it's interesting to me that they don't censor us when we have Scott Ritter on the show, at least not yet. We've never received a strike for having Scott on our program, and yet they've taken his channel down. And also they still allow a lot of content that openly violates the YouTube community guidelines, stuff that might be very extremist content. They seem to allow that to stay on the platform, but political speech and real news involving President Biden's opponents, namely Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., gets censored. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Rick.
Yeah, it defies logic in my mind. I try to be very careful about everything we say, and yet we get hit. While I turn around and I see made up stories about UFOs. I see people here, actually calling for the overthrow of the government, and they leave that stuff up. I see other channels, especially large channels with big followings, talk about subject matter like COVID, like vaccines, using language that would instantly get me taken down, I'm sure, and they never get touched. It makes no sense to me.
It makes no sense.
So the rules are not evenly applied either, and I can't give you an explanation.
And you are even in a different country. I should point out to everyone that Rick is not in the United States, has no particular stake in the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. He's up in Canada. And so, as we know, there is coordination between the Biden administration and the government of Justin Trudeau in Canada. We found that out through the Twitter files and through other disclosures that have come out in other lawsuits and discovery. We find that there has been, direct communication between President Biden and Trudeau, especially during the Freedom Convoy when bank accounts were being frozen. Rick, can you tell us a little bit about that and how that happened?
Well, it's clear. You can judge from the actions of government, right? And the flow of information is critical to the Trudeau regime and the Biden administration. And it's very clear that we know now from the documents that it's true, but you could see that happening. And so what happened during the convoy is the federal government in Canada really employed the same kind of tactics that they use during a war against a hostile nation. They used those tactics against their own people, the peaceful protesters who came out to Ottawa, and that included censoring Facebook posts, YouTube videos taken down, and that extended out later to freezing the GoFundMe and the Give, Send, Go campaigns, and then individual bank accounts of truckers that they felt were a threat of some kind, or people who wouldn't leave Ottawa. And then that actually had the indirect negative effects on families and other people who, if they froze the bank account of a trucker, then his family back home couldn't buy groceries. So the children would suffer, so they used the sledgehammer of censorship and financial oppression to exert control through coercive measures that were unprecedented in this country. And the day that Trudeau implemented the Emergencies Act, which is a kinder, gentler way of rebranding what was the War Measures Act in Canada, I said at that time, live on the air, that Canada died that day.
That was the day he declared war on the Canadian people. That's literally the War Measures Act.
Exactly. That's exactly what he did. He declared war on his own people. And that wasn't like a figure of speech for me at the time. It was a fact, because he literally used the War Measures Act to crack down on a protest.
Against speech he did not like.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And that's why we're all here today.
That's what that protest was free expression, free speech, and he couldn't have it. And all he had to do was come out and speak to the people, and he would never do that either.
No, he never came out. To this day, he still has not addressed his own people or their concerns.
No, refuses to engage with in dialogue with those folks who disagree with him, that small fringe minority with unacceptable views.
And even though this doesn't relate directly to YouTube, while we're talking about Trudeau and censorship, I'd like for you to explain to us Americans, because we don't understand Canadian law, why Maverick News is now censored from Facebook, why all news is censored from Facebook for Canadians. Canadians can no longer access news on the Facebook platform at all because of two new laws that have gone into effect, the C-18 law and the C-11 law. Could you give us a brief overview of what those laws are about and how it's affecting Canadian consumers of news?
Bill C-11 compels social media platforms to give preference to mainstream legacy media outlets with their news content.
Oops, sorry. Did I mute you? Rick, I'm sorry. I think I muted you by accident. You may have to unmute your mic again. Hello? Where'd you go, Rick?
There we are. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that was my bad. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So Bill C-11, for it compels social media platforms, all social media platforms, to give preference to mainstream legacy news media outlets in the search results and push them up to the top. Now, every mainstream news outlet in the country, in Canada now, receives some kind of government funding in a big way. They've given handouts to all of them. There's no such thing as really private media in this country anymore. So they get preferential treatment. So that's really pushing the government's message to the top. And you can see the difference even in the coverage in this country that is now very pro-Trudeau, pro-government. It's been that way since the money started to flow. Bill C-18 is legislation that compels social media companies also to go above and beyond the normal payouts that they would give to creators who are monetized, but to then pay additional fees to mainstream news media outlets to fund them for the content that they post on social media platforms. Meta has taken a stand against that, and they said, they have no problem screwing with the algorithm to push mainstream news to the top and to push independent producers off into obscurity, but they will not pay. So they said, we're just not going to carry any news content anymore because we're not willing to pay these media companies anything for it. So it's had this unintended consequence of then creating this new layer of bizarre censorship where Facebook has gone and they've deactivated they're blocking every single news page that they have on their platform. You can't share news content. You can't post news content. If it's detected as news content of any kind from anywhere in the world, you can't see it on Facebook anymore. So our news page, when you go to it here in Canada, you can't see the top banner. Every post has been hidden. I can't post anything to it. I can't do anything with that page anymore. It isn't just us. It's all the mainstream legacy media now as well. Just no news on Facebook. You can't even get ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CNN. You can't even get those pages anymore either. No content. So it's very, very strange. But I know that you have indicated that if you go to a news page, a Canadian news page, if you come to our news page, you can still see all the old content. It's still available.
That's right. Yeah, here in the States, we can still access Canadian news pages, but Canadians cannot get news about what's happening in their own country or anywhere in the world if they're on Facebook. It's so stupid. It's just beyond stupid.
It is. It's just about the dumbest thing ever.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, Rick, I'm going to ask you to mute your mic. An update for everybody on the panel. Twitter only gives us a limited number of seats on the speakers panel at a given time. So I see that some of you have requests in to speak. I see you. I just can't add everybody at once. So after someone speaks, I might remove them from the panel and add someone else in. So I'm just going to ask you to hang in there and be patient. We're going to get to everybody on the panel because I really do want to hear from everybody. And I want to go back to my co-host, Anita Stewart with the Kennedy campaign. Anita, if you're there, you can unmute yourself. And I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about, from an insider's perspective, working with the campaign and Bobby and Dennis Kucinich, what has been the campaign's response to this censorship, besides the lawsuits, obviously, and strategy for getting around the roadblocks that social media is putting in the campaign's way?
I can't really speak for the campaign and what they're doing in regards to strategy. I just know what I do. and I've been doing this and kind of slicking around this and really just like Wile E. Coyote, just kind of like sneaking around the corners trying to get things posted that I need to post. Sometimes I have to wait a little bit. Everybody's heard about algorithms. I don't know. I don't even really know what that means in regards to whether you can get something posted or not. I just know that there's certain things that become difficult. Facebook is one of those. I work with, of course, X, and I work with some other social networks. And I find that as far as I know, videos on Rumble are pretty good. And there's a lot less censorship there. And I would rather look at Rumble and read the live chats under the videos a lot of the times too. You'll find a lot of that is censored on YouTube. And of course, there's certain words that you just can't say or you can't write them down, depending on what social network you're working with. We all used to think TikTok was okay. And unfortunately, TikTok has also become censorship central. So
that's right. Mint Press News, one of my favorite news outlets, was censored by TikTok just this week.
Yep. So there's really no place safe except what I would think in a limited way, Rumble and right here on X, but everything else is not a sure thing. And all of us have experienced, like I'm sure, posting on Facebook and watching your post and thinking it's an important one, but it's shadow banned because nobody gives it a status, nobody comments. It might sit there for a week or two, and it's still there with no note under it or comment or anything. It's shadow banned. Nobody can see it. So nothing.
And on YouTube specifically, the official campaign channel is called Team Kennedy on YouTube. And that channel is so heavily throttled and hidden in the algorithm. It's practically invisible, folks. If you don't know where the channel is, and you go subscribe to it, you will not get notifications. You will not see it in search results. It is basically hidden for all intents and purposes. And that's why you'll notice it doesn't have very many subscribers. If it were seen by the general public, he'd probably have more than 1 million subscribers by now. I think it's about 68, 67,000 subscribers, and that is just ridiculously low for a presidential candidate. I think his Rumble channel has way more subscribers than his
Right.
YouTube channel.
And I'm not an attorney or anything like that, but all I can say is the laws stand in regards to censoring a presidential candidate and not letting a presidential candidate be heard. Those have to be upheld.
And you know, this really kind of started with Trump. They didn't censor him much during the 2016 campaign, but during the 2020 campaign, oftentimes when he would give an important speech, the mainstream media refused to cover it. They would cut away from his speeches before he was done speaking. Of course, that's when coverage of his rallies was starting to be taken down by YouTube, Facebook, and other platforms. But you know, this is really the Trump effect, is what I call it. It really, what started with President Trump and what was normalized under President Trump, because the public was willing to accept President Trump being censored, or at least maybe half the country, the half that voted for Joe Biden, they were fine with it when Donald Trump was being censored. But you know, censorship has a funny way of affecting us all. And you know, you might not like Donald Trump, you might cheer when he gets censored, but sooner or later it's going to come around to haunt the other side.
Right.
And now we see that happening to a Democrat, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I honestly, Anita, I think that the mainstream media and the Biden administration are more afraid of what Kennedy is saying than what Donald Trump is saying. I think they fear him more. What do you think?
Well, just listening to Bobby speak, you know, Mr. Kennedy speak is, I mean, most people in generations below mine, I'm in my 60s, they've never heard a presidential candidate speak like this. They're just totally in shock and awe that he is saying these things, like he's going to dismantle some of these agencies. And they haven't heard talks about peace for a long, long, long time. So this is the candidate, I believe this is the candidate of a lifetime. We're never going to see anybody like this again. And all hell is going to break loose if he's not in the White House. So, you know, we've got Klaus Schwab and the New World Order, and, you know, we're going to be paying for things just like they do in China. All these things are going to be instituted here in the U.S., and it gives us room to be pretty afraid, but we don't want to live in fear. We want to work towards a positive solution, and I really believe that this candidate is that positive solution.
And you know, Anita, the only real remedy under the Constitution is the courts. So Bobby is pursuing the only legal remedy that he has, which is to take Google, YouTube, the Biden administration, Facebook, Instagram, all of them to court. I have to give you guys an update on this case. Just this week, there was a pretty major update, and unfortunately, it's not good. The judge in this particular case ruled, you know, Bobby had asked for a restraining order, a temporary restraining order, until the case can get to court, asked the judge to basically order YouTube and Google to stop censoring him, at least temporarily, until the case can get to court. It's a really interesting story, so I want to kind of walk you through this. The judge that will be hearing the case is Judge Thompson, Judge Trina Thompson. This will be in San Francisco. And I'm going to take you through the case management a little bit so that you can get a feel for how this case has evolved. It was filed back on August the 2nd. And here's where the shenanigans start to appear. When you follow the history of the case, originally the case was assigned to Magistrate Judge Nathaniel Cousins. But then something strange happened about 2 weeks after the case was filed and assigned to this judge, something weird happened. And this often does happen when shenanigans are afoot. Those of you who might be lawyers out there, you know what I'm talking about. Suddenly, the case was reassigned to a different judge. It was taken away from Judge Cousins. It was reassigned to a U.S. District Court judge, and that's going to be Judge Trina Thompson. And she is now in charge of this case. Now, Trina Thompson is a Biden-appointed judge. And like most judges in California, she's very Democrat, very woke, very pro-vaccines, pro-science, as they say. And she is not going to be the judge we want. Obviously, she already turned down Kennedy's request for a temporary restraining order. He asked for that restraining order back on August the 18th. And I just want to also point out, and this is really important, the judge has full discretion in how the case is scheduled, okay? How long the case will take as it winds through the courts. The judge has full discretion in this matter. And the way that she has scheduled the case to proceed basically nullifies the entire case. And here's why. Discovery, which is what we need the most, it's only through discovery in the Missouri versus Biden case that we were able to get those documents, the paper trail, proving collusion, communication between the White House and Facebook, where the White House is telling Facebook which accounts to take down, which videos to take down, which posts to take down. We saw that in the Twitter files. And so the YouTube files are what we need now. And discovery is how we get them. But this judge has scheduled the case in such a way that discovery is not even going to be allowed in the case until after the 2024 election. Discovery, it's amazing. The date set for discovery is November 11th, 2024. That's after the election. Kind of makes the whole thing a moot point, doesn't it? And
right.
By the time they get into jury selection and the start of the trial, that's not scheduled until March 17th of 2025. 2 months after the next president of the United States is already sworn in. So this puts Kennedy obviously at a terrible disadvantage in his case because he will not be able to access discovery materials or prove his case or get to court before the election. And that's the whole point of the case. That's why he's suing, is they're censoring his presidential campaign. It's crazy. Anita, any thoughts
No
on that?
presidential candidate should ever be censored. They should be able to reach out to the people. They should be able to discuss their ideas, their ways to improve things, their ways to change things. That's why people vote. That's why they select a candidate. They select their favorite based on what he's communicating with them about. I've never seen anything like this, except for the last almost 20 years of my life now. I would say closer to 15. So the first time I saw it was working with Kucinich. The second time I saw it was working with Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney when she ran for president in the 2008 campaign.
Ah, yes.
And they censored her left and right, backwards and forwards. I remember trying to post something on the daily costs, for example, and they would not let me post it. And the head of that site, I can't recall his name, somebody out there probably knows it, but he contacted me directly. I said, look, I'm posting for, a presidential candidate, someone who's filed. He goes, we don't allow those kinds of posts here on this website. I said, she was a Democrat. Now she's a Green. Please explain to me. And he explained it to me in no uncertain terms that he was not going to allow any posts from her campaign on his website.
Well, the Daily Kos is famous for censoring people, going, all the way back to 2008. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is suing them, too. I forgot to mention that lawsuit.
Right.
He's also suing Daily Kos for censoring him. So And I don't know the status of that case. I haven't checked on that one in a while to see where that is in the courts. You know, these things take years to wind through the courts, as you can tell by the schedule that I just outlined for this current case against Google and YouTube. Obviously, it's going to be 2 years, almost 2 years before it even gets to court. But you know what I find interesting is that the cases against Donald Trump, those are moving forward through the courts with lightning fast speed. They don't seem to have any troubles getting that case expedited against Donald Trump. But when it comes to Kennedy's case against Google and YouTube, oh, they're going to take their sweet time, aren't they? Getting that case to court. They're not even going to let discovery proceed until after the 2024 election.
I think they're very afraid of our candidate.
They are. They are. There's no doubt about it. Because, you know, Kennedy's campaign, he's talking about all of those things that we're not supposed to talk about. He's talking about the safety of vaccines, the efficacy of vaccines. He's talking about vaccine mandates. He's talking about the CIA murdering his uncle, President John F. Kennedy, and his father, Senator Robert Kennedy. He has pledged to, you know, release all the secret JFK files that the CIA is still withholding 60 years after the assassination of President Kennedy. He has pledged to do that on day one if he's elected president. He has also pledged on day one to pardon and free journalist Julian Assange, who I like to say he was the first to be censored and has been censored in the most harsh way imaginable by being charged with violation of the Espionage Act. He's got 18 counts against him. He's been sitting in Belmarsh Prison in the UK for over 4 years now. And he is not allowed to communicate at all with the outside world. Julian is not allowed to text. He's not allowed to speak. He's not allowed to give interviews. We have not seen Julian or heard from him in 4 years. That is the ultimate censorship, guys. And, you know, it could come back to haunt each and every one of us, any journalist that does national security journalism, any journalist that does journalism that challenges official narratives. For example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Last week or week before did an interview with Tucker Carlson. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that interview. And in that interview, he's talking about the JFK files and the assassination of his uncle, and Mike Pompeo, former CIA director under Donald Trump. Mike Pompeo, you know, Tucker Carlson had done a story. You probably saw it last year. He has a secret source inside the CIA, an anonymous source that Tucker says has read the secret CIA files that prove the CIA killed an American president in 1963. The day after Tucker aired that report, he got a text from an assistant to Mike Pompeo telling him that he had violated national security and that his source should go to prison. Okay? Also, it was Mike Pompeo who threatened Yahoo News. Yahoo News broke the story, I guess it's been about 2 years ago now, that Mike Pompeo's CIA had a secret plan to kidnap or assassinate Julian Assange. Yahoo published that story, and Mike Pompeo went on the Megyn Kelly show and told the whole world that the journalists at Yahoo and their sources inside the CIA should be charged with violating the Espionage Act and that they should all be in prison. So that seemed to come as news to Robert Kennedy. He did not seem to be aware of that. He acted surprised in that interview with Tucker, but he knows now because Tucker told him. And it's all true, folks. It's absolutely true. And it's frightening to all of us who do national security journalism that each and every one of us could face Julian Assange's fate. It's just a matter of time. And speaking of journalists who do dangerous work and work for dangerous news organizations, I'd like to bring in my good friend Caleb Maupin, who's a reporter for RT, formerly RT America, until the government basically shut down RT America and put him out of business. But flagship RT is still going, and you can't watch it on YouTube, though, because YouTube censored RT before I think any other network in the world. RT is censored worldwide on YouTube. and other platforms and cable and satellite providers throughout Canada, the United States, and most of Western Europe. So, Caleb, if you're there, why don't you unmute your mic and join us and tell us about the story of how RT became the most censored network in the world and why.
Well, thank you, Lori, and I do appreciate the opportunity to join this discussion. I work at RT. I've worked at RT since March of 2016. I was hired to cover the 2016 election, and that was certainly an exciting time, and I've been at RT ever since. I did commentary, interviews, and writing for the website prior to that, but I became their, roving U.S. correspondent in 2016. And I still work with international. RT America is no more. It was basically forced to no longer operate. And I've got to say that, I work for a TV network from Russia, but I'm from a small town in Ohio. My mother's family's been in Ohio for many generations. My father's family is from Missouri, the part of Missouri right next to Arkansas, in the Ozark Mountains. They call it Little Dixie. And, everything I do at RT or in my writing or in my work with the Center for Political Innovation is motivated by love for my country. I love the United States of America, and I love the democratic traditions here. I love the legacy of struggle, whether it's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or the labor movement or the Revolution of 1776 or Abraham Lincoln and the heroic effort to defeat slavery. I am motivated purely by love for the United States of America. And the reason that Russia is putting forward a platform like RT, in my analysis, I'm sure there's other people at RT that wouldn't see it this way. The reason that they have put forward a platform that allows me to report the truth about the United States when American media does not offer such platforms is because I think that Russia is up against the same sinister forces that are destroying this country. In the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia was economically devastated. Boris Yeltsin was basically the puppy of Bill Clinton, and they went in there and they just looted the economy. The population of Russia significantly decreased, mass unemployment, mass hunger, and Vladimir Putin emerged because he had an economic plan to fix it. He had written his academic thesis about how one could use oil and natural gas and manage oil and natural gas with, the government and use that to reboot and restart Russia's industrial base. And when he got elected, he put his program into practice, and he created and made Gazprom and Rosneft two giant state-controlled energy corporations that started bringing in huge amounts of oil and gas revenue. And with that, he rebuilt the industrial base. He got the farming sector going again. He got the industries, the steel industry going again. He basically gave the country an economic reboot, and living standards started going up. And because of that, all across Russia, there's widespread love for Vladimir Putin. And he did it by standing up to BP and Shell Oil and Chevron and Hermitage Capital Management and HSBC Bank and these big corporations that had sunk their fangs into Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Well, those same corporations have sunk their fangs into Ohio and Pennsylvania and Texas. And, with this whole conversation is about censorship. And, censorship is a very old argument in the United States. We talk about, should you be able to shout fire in a crowded theater, or what constitutes obscenity? But I think the conversation here is about much more than just censorship and freedom of speech. What we're dealing with here is that there is a shadow government that has taken control and is basically flaunting before the American people their right to decide what kind of government we have. In the lead up to the 2020 elections, they decided we weren't allowed to hear about Hunter Biden's laptop. They said, even though that they knew it was true, they would declare it Russian propaganda. Facebook coordinated with the FBI, so did Twitter. And now we know for a fact that they basically decided that they were going to make sure that this factually accurate news story was not circulated because they didn't think it would lead us to vote in the right way. Well, that's blatantly an example of collusion between the intelligence apparatus and the tech monopolies, and they're colluding to rig our elections. And they're doing it once again with RFK's campaign. Imagine if there was some app from Russia that was widely used in the United States and they started picking some candidates and boosting them over others. That would never be allowed, of course. But we have an app, YouTube, that is closely tied in with the American government. And they are deciding what candidates we're allowed to hear from and what candidates we're not. This is a blatant display of a group of unelected, technocrats deciding in coordination with the intelligence apparatus that they know better than us and that they have a right to determine who we have as our government. That goes against everything that the Constitution, professes. When Abraham Lincoln spoke of government of, by, and for the people, I mean, we're not seeing that. Now, it's important to note that Silicon Valley and the tech monopolies are themselves the result of the intelligence agencies. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote his important book, The Technotronic Era, talking about how the United States could defeat the Soviet Union by placing itself at the center of the information revolution. And you'll remember how Al Gore, he made that, misspeech. He said, "We invented the internet." Well, what he was referring to was American intelligence provided the loans and gave the direction, and the NSA and the FBI and the CIA, they made sure that the United States was at the center of the computer revolution. And what's very scary is that the spiritual advisor of Al Gore, the woman who was providing him, with spiritual guidance, et cetera, her name was Marilyn Ferguson. And she was out of the Stanford Research Institute. She claimed to have psychic powers. She was one of these mystical people. She wrote a very disturbing manifesto in 1981 called The Aquarian Conspiracy, basically arguing that the human population has expanded too much. We've gotten out of balance with Mother Nature. And that it's time to degrow the world in order to bring things back into balance. It's a very, very sinister manifesto that she composed. And, Al Gore was very close to her, arranged for her to have events at the Clinton White House. And that this kind of new age thinking that is very pessimistic, it really kind of has a grip over the Democratic Party and their leadership. And they, at this point, have a grip over the means of information. Now, I'm a socialist. I would like to see a society where the banks, factories, and industries and the centers of economic power are organized to serve the people. And we've always been ruled by the capitalists, by the owning class, the factory owners, the bankers, the billionaires. But we have seen a particularly dangerous wing of our ruling class, a particularly dangerous wing of the ultra rich and the tech monopolies that they created and have propped up with the government. They have asserted themselves into control over the American state. And this is deeply, deeply disturbing. And I think all over the world, there are forces that are resisting their drive to grind the world into poverty, their drive to reduce the human population, their drive to hold back growth and development in order to maintain their monopoly. And there are forces here in the United States that are resisting as well. And that, if you look at what the Communist Party talked about back in the 1950s, before they got squashed by McCarthyism, they talked about building an anti-monopoly coalition. All kinds of different forces that are against the big monopolies, the big corporations that are tied in with the government and use the government to prop up their power. That's what I'm interested in seeing, an anti-monopoly coalition. Libertarians, conservatives, liberals, socialists, communists, anarchists, anyone who will stand up to these big monopolies and their drive to degrow, their drive for World War III, their drive to hold back human development. That's the kind of alliance that we need to create. And so I'm really honored to be here. I know there's a lot of very amazing, dynamic individuals who are scheduled to speak after this. So I'll stop talking now. And I want to thank you once again for this platform. Thank you very much.
Oh, wait, don't stop talking yet. I have a question. I have a follow-up. You told me a story once, and I'd like for you to refresh my memory and tell everyone here listening the story of when the U.S. government, I guess it was the State Department, forced your network, RT, to register as foreign agents, and the head of RT wrote on the document that they had to sign that they signed that document under duress. Can you explain that?
Yes, well, there's a very obscure piece of legislation that was passed in 1938 called the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And it's very vaguely written. And they basically tell the FBI agents, we don't enforce that. Just ignore that piece of legislation. It was like only enforced 5 or 6 times in U.S. history. And it was originally created in the lead up to World War II to be kind of a way to control Nazi lobbyists in the United States. People who were lobbying for Nazi Germany. It was the way Roosevelt could kind of say, now, keep in your lane now, or else we can use this law against you. And it's been very rarely enforced. And the language of it is extremely vague. But the law has an exception for media outlets written into it. It explicitly says it does not apply to media outlets. But during the aftermath of the 2016 elections, amid the hysteria about Russian meddling or whatever, the Department of Justice decided to come to RT America and force RT America to register as a foreign lobbyist under threat of arrest. And at that point, basically, RT was told, if you don't fill this out, we'll arrest you for violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So they were forced to register with the Department of Justice as a foreign lobbyist, even though they didn't lobby TV network.
Wow.
And Sputnik Radio got similar treatment. Now, Sputnik Radio took it to court and tried to fight it, and the courts did not rule in their favor. But it is a ridiculous piece of legislation. And under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, you basically have to pay the salary of an FBI agent who looks over everything you do. You have to pay, it's something like $1,500 every month. On top of that, you have to provide any documents they want, including private emails and correspondence. It's a huge violation of your right to exist. You're basically treated as some kind of dangerous foreign entity. And there are all kinds of real lobbying organizations in Washington, D.C. that are not registered under this law. And RT, before it was ultimately shut down, was forced to register. And now they're using this law to target a group of Black activists based in Florida and Missouri called the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. And they have accused them of being unregistered foreign agents of Russia. Just because they had some Zoom calls, just because they had some web conferences, and they are facing 10 years in prison. They've been indicted and they've got a trial coming up, and they're charging them with violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act. They're trying to claim that, the election campaign where they got like 1% of the vote in St. Petersburg, Florida for city council was somehow a Russian conspiracy and that they're unregistered lobbyists. It is an extreme attack on civil liberties that Tucker Carlson has spoken up about, that Glenn Beck has spoken up. All kinds of people have looked at this case and said, this is absolutely ridiculous. It criminalizes going to other countries and having a conference. It criminalizes having web meetings and putting forward opinions that the U.S. State Department doesn't like. And I would urge everyone to look into the Uhuru case and raise it from the heavens, because if they can put the 4 leaders of the Uhuru movement in jail as foreign agents, they can basically outlaw any anti-war activism in America. So I would urge everyone to look into that case and see how dangerous it is.
And so much for freedom of the press. I mean, RT America was an American corporation, as I understand it, based in the United States. It was a subsidiary of Russian RT. But even if it was a foreign press office, they should be allowed to, practice journalism in the United States. It's unbelievable that they have to go through all of this, registering as a foreign lobbyist, paying an FBI agent to surveil them. I've been a journalist for 35 years, Caleb, and I've never seen anything like it. It absolutely scares the crap out of me. And another thing that scares the crap out of me, of course, we would expect smears against Mr. Kennedy, and they're smearing him now in the same way that they smeared Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign, the 2020 campaign, and still to this day. They say he's a Russian agent. He's a friend of Vladimir Putin. He's an enemy of the state. And of course, all of this is absolutely false. Certainly in the case of Mr. Kennedy, I can say with complete confidence that he is not in the employ of Vladimir Putin or the Russian government in any way, shape, or form. And, they're saying that, Kennedy is doing the bidding of the Russian government and spreading Russian propaganda in his message, which is simply that he wants to end the war. He hasn't really taken a side. He's not necessarily siding with Russia. His son Connor did a tour of duty fighting with the International Legion in Ukraine, fighting on the side of Ukraine. I think as a mediator, and the President of the United States really cannot take a side one way or the other and should not take a side if he's going to mediate peace between two warring nations. I think it's important that he maintains some neutrality there. Of course, I support Russia personally in this war. I think that they are on the right side of history, but that's just my opinion. But Mr. Kennedy, he has shown grace and sympathy towards both sides. He understands that hundreds of thousands of young men and women are dying. Civilians are being killed every single day, and that this has to stop. And Donald Trump says the same thing. He says he'll end the war in 24 hours if he gets back into office. And I believe that that is the primary reason, guys, why the State Department, the Justice Department, the CIA, and the Biden administration are doing their best to smear these two candidates, to censor these two candidates, and to crush them, to absolutely crush them under their fascist boot heels. And, you know, speaking of Russia and Russian media that's been heavily censored and harassed in the United States by the intelligence community, someone else who's been censored, another journalist who's just censored, unfortunately, from this platform this week is Garland Nixon, who's a talk radio host on Pacifica and also on Sputnik. And I've been trying to get Garland in here. Of course, his main Twitter account has been censored, but we're trying to sort of bring him in the back door through a friend's account that he has access to. And I sent him an invite. And in order to speak, Garland, if you can hear me out there, if you're listening, we would love to have you step up to the mic and give us a few words. To speak, you'll have to accept that invitation that I sent you, the speaker's invite. If you look in your DMs, you should find that speaker's invite, and then we can add you to the panel and bring you up. But it looks like you've got a request in to speak. If you'll just click accept on that invite, we can bring you into the panel. And in the meantime, I'd like to move on to my friend Matthew Tower, I see is here. Matthew, you can unmute your mic. And, you know, when we first started the campaign, you and I did a podcast called All the Way with RFK, or RFK All the Way. And you were there in Boston on April 19th when Kennedy announced his candidacy. You were there at the party. And of course, we talked about it on our podcast together and covered it for several weeks. And that's what started my battle against YouTube, and yours too. Both of us, you know, later repurposed that as a podcast. We uploaded episode 1. As soon as I uploaded episode 1 to my YouTube channel of this podcast about RFK, YouTube immediately censored it, took the video down, gave me a strike, put me in YouTube jail for 7 days. And as soon as I got out of YouTube jail, the next week, I uploaded episode 2. And YouTube took that episode down seconds after it went live. During the premiere, they just yanked it off the air. And then they gave me a second strike on my YouTube channel, which demonetized my channel. I had been monetized up until that point. After that, I, of course, could not take super chats or get any ad revenue on my channel. That's fine. But then I uploaded a third episode of the podcast, and that was the final straw. That was when YouTube just took down my Laurie Spencer channel altogether. And I wanted to ask you, Matthew, to tell us a little bit about your experience with YouTube, because I believe a couple of episodes of your podcast have been removed by YouTube about RFK. Is that right?
Thank you so much for hosting, Lori. Hi, everyone. This is Matthew Tower with the RFK All the Way podcast. And yes, indeed, the very first episode, on which you were our guest star, YouTube did take that down. And I wanted to just share a kind of meta comment about all of this and how I see all this kind of connecting together. You were mentioning, Lori, about how Robert Kennedy Jr. has promised to release the records of his uncle's assassination that have been censored for so long, withheld by the CIA. And fundamentally, it is absolutely clear at this point. I think we can say beyond a reasonable doubt that the CIA assassinated President John Kennedy. Okay. But they didn't just assassinate JFK. They didn't just kill one man. They overthrew the government. The CIA took over the country on November 22nd, 1963, and has covertly, more or less, ruled the country for almost 60 years. Our elected politicians are, generally speaking, puppets, right? And sometimes they try to push back, but generally they do. Generally, they don't push back. And, you know, there was that famous clip when Senator Schumer said to Rachel Maddow, you know, Trump is an idiot for challenging the CIA because the CIA has 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Well, that's the general attitude of all of our elected politicians, right? They're supposed to oversee the CIA, and they're not going to say one word of criticism about the CIA. Why? Because they're afraid they're going to get killed. Just like Jack was, the CIA killed Robert Kennedy, the CIA killed Malcolm X, killed Martin Luther King. So here we are talking about what I would call not YouTube, but CIA tube. The CIA was involved in the founding of Google. The CIA has numerous employees at YouTube running the show over there, right? So it's not just, you know, in the old days under Operation Mockingbird, right, the CIA would pay off key professionals in the media, either journalists or executive producers. They've gone beyond that. It's not just that they're paying Google employees. They actually have CIA former employees embedded at Google running everything. So the CIA, of course, the CIA is going after all content related to Robert Kennedy because the CIA doesn't want Robert Kennedy to become president and release the files and release the truth about what the CIA has been doing to this country for 60 years continuously. So that's the meta comment.
Amen. Amen. Preach, brother. Keep going. Keep going.
Okay, what do you want me to keep going on, Lori?
I just want to know, like, how many times has YouTube censored you for RFK content? Has it just been that one time?
There was that one episode that they took down, but my channel is totally shadow banned, right? You cannot find my channel. Like it's funny because I upload new episodes of my podcast to Rumble and YouTube at the same time. And I got 10x more views at least on Rumble, 10x more followers every single time. And Rumble's universe of viewers is much smaller than YouTube's. And it's just very easy to confirm that YouTube is shadow banning everything because when you search for RFK, the results for my content and lots of other content just don't come up on YouTube, but it comes up right away on Rumble. So, you know, I think CIA, I think what they're doing is I think they're doing a combination of two things. One is for a lot of channels, mine being one, but others like Kim Iverson, for example, even Mike Tyson, who had one of his interview with RFK taken down. They're taking down some stuff, but not necessarily killing the entire channel the way they did to you, which I'm so sorry you went through that. It's so horrible to take away your livelihood the way YouTube did that. But I think when they take down one or two of the videos, it's like these strikes are intimidation. It's intimidation tactics. It's like, don't go too far. We're warning you. It's kind of like when, you know, there's that mysterious brick through the window. And I've heard those stories. Where's the mysterious brick through the window of someone who is speaking out? That's what those strikes are. But then they don't have to actually take the entire channel down. They can just make it impossible to find because fundamentally, here's my theory of the case. My theory is that the CIA doesn't care if there is a minimal and ineffective opposition to them. What they don't want is a critical mass of opposition to their agenda, to the deep state agenda. And so if they can find a way to kind of put a box around our voices and our opposition and kind of keep it under control, keep it on the fringes, keep those voices from getting too loud and gathering too much momentum, then they can steamroll and they can win. And that's what they are trying to do. That's just my take.
Absolutely. And your podcast is especially dangerous, not only because you cover RFK and his campaign, but you've also done a whole series of episodes about the history of the CIA, Alan Dulles. You recently did a great interview with David Talbot, who's the author of The Devil's Chessboard about Alan Dulles, and of course wrote a book about the Kennedy brothers, the brothers book. So yeah, not only are you talking about RFK, but you're also talking about the darkest chapters of of our history and the CIA's history, and Alan Dulles, who I believe was the devil himself. But I wish you luck with the podcast. I hope that you gain a larger audience on Rumble. A lot more people are switching over to Rumble. Our hope is that sooner or later we're going to make YouTube basically obsolete because everyone's listening on Rumble instead. So I'd like to bring Rick Walker back in because Matthew just brought up an excellent point that we address all the time on Maverick News, and we deal with it every single day, Rick, is self-censorship. You know, how once you get a strike and they tell you what not to do and what not to say, and they keep changing the community guidelines, of course, then we have to censor ourselves. And I know you deal with that every single day. Tell us a little bit about the self-censorship that you're subjecting yourself to.
It's always top of mind when you know that certain subjects are taboo. You stay away from those subjects. You start to speak in code. It doesn't just have an impact on me or you. It also has an impact on our audience, our community. The social media platforms we're on are about building communities, and we have a call-in portion of our program. And as a result, we have to ask the viewers, if we're still on Facebook and YouTube, to speak in code or simply to avoid certain subjects, knowing that even if a caller uses a certain word or makes a statement or expresses an opinion that goes against community guidelines or against a political narrative, then we can get a strike for that. So it isn't even just what we say, it's what other people might say. It has a chilling effect all the way around, not just on us, but on the public, on our entire community. It isn't right. It undermines democracy. It undermines freedom of speech, freedom of expression. This is something that has made my country, Canada, and the United States unrecognizable to me.
It is. It's unrecognizable to me too, Rick. And we deal with that every day on Maverick News. And I'd like to bring in another censored journalist. There's so many of us. Gosh, where do I start? Who do I go to next? I see that my friend Welsh Republic is listening in. While we're talking about foreign journalists in other countries who are being censored, my friend Welsh is all the way over in New Zealand. And he also had a YouTube channel taken down for talking about those forbidden subjects. Welsh, if you can hear me, go ahead and unmute yourself. And I wanted to ask you to tell us about your story and why YouTube censored you and took down your channel. Are you there, Welsh?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Laurie?
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you just great. Hello, my friend.
Hi, Laurie. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm not very good at talking in groups. Because I've got autism and it's very hard with me with sensory overload. But yeah, I have a YouTube channel called the Welsh Republic Podcast. I've had you on, Laurie. I really enjoyed the interview we did. One of my videos on YouTube got taken down. It was an interview with Chrissy Mayer. We were talking about January 6th, when in fact we weren't even talking about that at all. And I also got censored for the same thing, like for medical misinformation and all that stuff. And and my main YouTube channel got taken down. It was ridiculous. So I had to make a backup YouTube channel and a Rumble. But lucky thing, my Rumble's done pretty good. So yeah, that's my story. And I think it's ridiculous, how people like, Trump, whether you like him or not, is being, censored, especially when he's being indicted. And what's happening to Robert F. Kennedy is it's just nonsense. It's like Biden is going full, tyrannical. So yeah, that's really what I got to say.
Well, thank you, Welsh. And I think I'm joining you on your podcast tomorrow night, aren't I?
Yeah. That's the plan. Yeah, that's the plan.
Awesome. Cool. Well, hopefully I won't say anything that gets you banned off YouTube.
You know,
I'll,
I'll just say one more thing. I just want to say to everybody on here, you, Laurie, and everyone, keep fighting. You know, the New World Order's losing. They're losing their grip. Humanity's waking up. We might have to go through a bit of a hard period, but humanity will come out of this positive. We will.
yes, we will. Because we are determined. And every time they censor us, we find new ways to get around the roadblocks. Something that we're doing at Maverick News, and I'd like to invite all of my colleagues on this panel tonight. If you have a YouTube channel, if you get censored, or if you just like, if you broadcast anti-imperialist news, anti-censorship news, if you're doing real news, we'd like to work with you. We are building a Maverick News network where we're partnering up with other journalists. And when one journalist's channel gets taken down, other journalists in the network send that journalist stream out through their channels. And so that way the message still gets out there. We amplify each other. And it's sort of like passing the mic around. If someone turns your mic off, someone else steps up and hands you a microphone. So it's just one of many ways that we're trying to fight back. If you'd like to join the Maverick News Network, reach out to me. You can DM me or email me, or get a hold of me through my YouTube channel, or call into Maverick News. We have a live call-in show every night. So I'm going to go to my friend Jose Vega. It looks like Jose is here. And hello, Jose. How are you doing tonight, my friend?
Hi, Lori. Thanks for having me on. I'm just getting over a pretty bad cold, but, I hope you guys can make me out okay. Yeah?
Sound good? Yeah.
Okay. If you hear me clear my throat a few times, it's, yeah. Just reflecting on what I'm hearing tonight, I'm also happy that some of my other colleagues are on this, and I'm happy to hear that Garland is trying to get in. Um, the censorship thing that has been a fight now. I mean, this isn't something that's new, but I'm happy that RFK Jr. has decided to take it up on his shoulders to try and tackle this beast of YouTube. I remember there was a movement in Europe where they tried to unionize YouTube, and that was a funny time. I remember when Alex Jones was kicked off. I don't think he ever sued YouTube. This is a massive behemoth that RFK Jr. has decided to take on. But the censorship off YouTube is just one small portion of the problem. I mean, we've seen lots of people on this call be put on kill lists or censored in other ways, or have been deplatformed or canceled or whatever. And it's all part of the same process. There is a swift, or an attempt for there to be a swift kind of like kicking of people who are dissenting of the current administration, to get them to buckle and get them to stop speaking. And they're doing everything they can to make sure that, one, the status quo can continue to exist the way it does, and two, to make sure that any challengers are not, left standing. This is what we're seeing with President Trump and all these stupid indictments, and they don't realize that it's only making him more and more popular. And that's kind of the fatal flaw of the enemy, is that they don't realize that when they censor you, it only makes your voice a whole lot louder, because then people want to know what it is you're saying that they don't want out there. And I think the question is, well, why is this all happening now? And I really do believe it has to do a lot with the international situation and what's going on with the BRICS summit, and the fact that there is a collapsing order of the Western hegemony. And, the BRICS has Dmitry Medvedev. He invited the West and said, look, anybody can be a part of this process as long as they don't sanction any of the countries. And we're seeing that, the West is hell bent on destroying them, and also in the process destroying themselves if they have to. I mean, look what happened at Hawaii, right? We gave $700 for every household, and RFK Jr. did the math. If we had given Hawaii what we've given to Ukraine, we could have given them $500,000 for every household. And instead, Biden insulted them by not showing up for 2 weeks and then saying, here's $700. I feel your pain. I lost my Corvette once, so it was just as bad as losing your home. And maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that was basically what he said. And I know that my colleagues can elaborate a little bit more Anastasia and Kynan, who are also on, who can elaborate a little bit more as to why this is going on in this particular moment. And I guess I'll just end off by saying we're at a point where we can win this thing. And the more desperate they get with their censorship is only a sign that we are winning. But desperation does not also mean that it's a time for us to celebrate, because when people get desperate, they start acting in desperation, and it means they're going to start taking actions like that are going to seem very radical, and it's going to shock people. And I don't think it's far-fetched to assume that there might be a bloodbath going on in some of these countries that have decided to kick out the French, just because these countries cannot tolerate, them not being in control. So I think people should be prepared for that and should be speaking out and fighting for them every single day right now to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I'll stop there. I don't want to say too much. I can't speak too much. I want to preserve my voice to yell at some politicians. So
Yeah,
thank
you better save your voice for that, because your voice is very effective when it comes to yelling at politicians. And I love you for it, Jose. Thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate you.
of course.
We still have our friend Garland Nixon, who's trying to get into the space. Garland, I hope you can hear me out there. I check your DM box, and you'll see a speaker's invite, and you'll have to click accept on that invite before you can join the speaker's panel. And I see that my friend Nick Brana of the People's Party and Rage Against the War Machine is here. And Nick, go ahead and unmute yourself. Nick was on the show with me last night on the Strange Bedfellows podcast. We had an amazing conversation. As you guys probably know, Nick was on the Bernie campaign back in 2016, and he grew pretty disgusted with the Democratic Party and the way that they treated Bernie, and eventually got a belly full of the Bernie campaign as well and left to form the Independent People's Party. Nick is the reason that Dr. Cornel West is now running for president of the United States. He's the guy that talked Cornel into entering the race. And for a while, Cornel was running under the banner of the People's Party. And then Cornel switched to the Green Party. So he is now running with the Green Party of the United States. But it's a pleasure to have you here, Nick. This is kind of a continuation of the conversation that we started last night on Strange Bedfellows with Rick Walker of Maverick News and yourself. So welcome to the panel. Thanks for joining us. And tell us a little bit about how censorship has affected you, your candidates, and your presence on YouTube.
Hey, Lori. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And it was great to talk to you and Rick last night. Really great to compare notes. You as someone who's been so involved in the Kennedy campaign, and, me with my experience from the Bernie campaign. And I think we found so many similarities in our conversation between the rigging and, the way that they are trying to suppress Kennedy, just like they tried to suppress Bernie, and all the DNC shenanigans on that side. Another form of censorship that is, just as egregious, built into the electoral system, censorship from the very parties which run the primaries. And the primaries are, of course, an integral part of the process. And so, that's why I think when we talk about this, it's important to describe it as what the Democratic Party did to Bernie and what they're doing to Kennedy right now is rigging an election. They are rigging the election against them, and they rigged it against them because, essentially to be able to get to through that, is the primary is a part of the election. So, by rigging that, you are rigging the election, and I think that we all need to say that rather than saying, rigging the primary, because that makes it sound as if it's distinct. You have to get through the primary to be in the general election in the major parties. So one of the things that, I'm really thinking too, Caleb gave, an awesome history, and, Jose and everybody else has added a lot to this conversation. And definitely want to say I feel for Garland too. Since I don't know if Garland's going to be able to jump on, but I know that part of what it's good to bring attention to in his case is that Twitter, which for my part, and I know Garland agrees, is just, it's not becoming any more free speech oriented than it was. There were some kind of symbolic gestures that were made, re-adding, Trump and some other people. But for the most part, the suppression, especially against the independent left, is extremely strong. We never saw those files from the Twitter files. There was a suppression of kind of the political right, but never the independent left. The left was just treated as the Democratic Party. And what they've done to Garland now is actually a new form. They're pioneering a new form of censorship and deplatforming on Garland right now, which is especially pernicious and, which is particularly important to fight. And that is, they didn't just remove him from the platform. Instead, they locked him out of his account and they said, there's some suspicious activity in your account and we don't know if it belongs to you anymore, so we're not going to let you back in, until you can prove that you are who you are. And he sent them a ton of information, proving this is who I am. Here's my phone number, my email, everything else, documentation. They said, nah, that I don't even know if they got back to him. But, the difference here, the kind of advantages to them of banning people in this new way is that the account then becomes dormant. So Garland's account will still be there, but it's basically dormant. So people assume that Garland just disappeared, and any kind of account that he tried to recreate or something, first they would ban it because it's against their terms. But people will just assume that he's kind of vanished. And then at the same time, they scrubbed his profile. This is the hilarious part. So they said, "Oh, we can't let you in because you can't prove who you are." But they also scrubbed his profile, deleted all these tweets of his past live streams. So complete bullshit.
Wow.
Yeah, and I hope Garland intends to push on that. But something I wanted to bring up lastly here is there's been a very, very deliberate. If you look at the kind of the escalation in the censorship since pre 2016, 2015, like I brought up with you and Rick last night, Lori, the algorithm actually used to direct people to kind of more controversial content. So like more independent content on YouTube, if you kind of just followed the recommended videos, it would take you to stuff that, was more anti-establishment because that's what people wanted to see. And then after 2016, and especially after 2020, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all the social media companies, they reversed the direction of the recommends. And of course, they manipulated the feeds and all of that so that it all is now routing you to establishment, mainstream media. And I really think that our time on social media is numbered. I think it's already been decided. I know that the tech giants and tech billionaires, I know firsthand from people who've worked at some of these companies that and spoken with people at a high level that they meet regularly. And so the leaders of these different social media companies, and of course we know they're all manipulated by intelligence agencies, especially the CIA and the FBI. And so I think that there is a very deliberate, drawn-out plan to basically purge and scrub these social media companies of any kind of meaningful dissent. Maybe maintaining very slight, ultra shadow banned and siloed, opposition, so that they can claim, people are still there. But that's something that, us as a movement, I don't think we've reconciled with or really thought, what are we going to do about that? I think there's kind of an inherent assumption that we've had that with the birth of the internet, that our ability to communicate peer to peer and go past the mainstream media gatekeepers was just going to kind of continue to increase, that it was going to be a continuing positive, upward trend line. But in reality, it may look something more like a bell curve. We may be somewhere around the peak of that bell curve, after which our ability to communicate with each other is restricted because elites realize that the internet is such a threat to them, and we are once again contained, and the internet becomes very much like television, where it's one-way communication. It's no longer peer-to-peer.
Boy, is that a great point. You know, when the government created the internet, I don't think they realized that they were unleashing such a Frankenstein monster. If it got in the hands of the people, who knows what could happen? Then you have the rise of citizen journalism, and social media has become the place that professional journalists like myself use. It's an invaluable tool not only to get our message out and to get our stories out, but also to gather news when there's breaking news, when something is happening anywhere in the world. We go on Twitter and Facebook, and we're looking for videos posted by users, citizen journalists, people on the street who see news happening. They whip out their phone, they take video, and boom, they're a reporter. You're an instant journalist now, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm actually a fan of citizen journalism. I think it's the best thing to ever happen to journalism, and we need that. We desperately need that. It's a way to get, in the moment, real time reporting of breaking news events around the world. And I think this has the deep state very worried. It's not just about political campaigns, it's about the practice of journalism, the craft of journalism, and free speech for all. I did want to bring in people from all sides of the political spectrum. That's why I wanted Nick here with the People's Party. I wanted conservatives to take part, people with third parties. And I've been trying to get my friend Angela McCardle, who's chair of the National Libertarian Party, to join us. She is on the panel, but it seems to be having some technical difficulties. I'm hearing from several guests on our panel tonight that they're trying to get in and they cannot seem to get in. So I don't know if Twitter is messing with us or censoring us. But I sent Angela a speaker's invite, and she has not been able to accept or not been able to get into the space. And we seem to be having the same difficulty with Don DeBar and Garland Nixon to bring them in. So guys, if you can hear me, if you're out there listening, Angela, Don, Garland, check your DM box. And if you see the invite in there, be sure to click accept on that invite. And that should bring you into the panel if this thing is working the way that it's supposed to be working. So while we're waiting for them to join us, I'd like to bring in someone from the Forward Party. That's Andrew Yang's organization, yet another third party. I'd like to bring in Holden Collada, who's requested to speak. And Holden, if you'd like to unmute your microphone, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about the Forward Party and what your experience has been with censorship on YouTube, if you have any.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing me up to speak here, Lori. This is a fantastic space so far. I, agreed so much with what you've been saying about like citizen journalism. Where would we be without that, honestly? With all the censorship that's happening. So I appreciate that. Nick, I love what you're doing with the People's Party. I'm super glad to have met you up here. The Forward Party is it's a narrowly focused kind of catch-all party, just really focused on election reform, focused on, none of our elections are competitive today. And so without that, we're not having these any meaningful conversations, meaningful debates. That I think, only happens in party primaries these days, which is interesting to see because, the Democratic Party obviously rigged the primary against Bernie in 2020. They subverted, their own democracy, what they were talking about to keep him out. And I'm really interested to see how this works with Kennedy this time around, because I got to go to New Hampshire a couple months ago to see Kennedy's peace speech, and I was just blown away. I have never heard. I'm 22, by the way, just for some context. I'm pretty young, and I've never in my life heard a candidate like this. It felt for so long like the conversation we were having was just not meaningful. Even when I was in high school, younger, and I didn't know exactly what was going on, I couldn't explain things. It's just like, we're at war in how many countries, we're spending how much on the military, like all these things. And so hearing Kennedy for the first time, a lot of things clicked for me. The inflation, the housing crisis we're having, everything, things started to really click. And, you know, we've mentioned on this panel a couple times, like how many people on here have just been banned for these really vague reasons. I'm not on YouTube, so I don't have personal experience with this. I've moved over to Rumble at this point and kind of watch everything on there. But you know, that's really the point. That's exactly the problem, is that everybody is just banned for these vague reasons, right? Like, it doesn't matter what the issue is anymore. It's just all about, you know, this kind of left-right narrative, which you see in the media, but that's not even where the American people are. You know, in media, it's just reflected as left versus right, and you know, people are, is it helping my team or is it helping the other team? And that's how they kind of make their decisions. You know, I know multiple people in my own life, but my own parents, frankly, who would breathe a sigh of relief if Kennedy were silenced. You know, they don't want to listen to this. They think, you know, he's kind of threatening democracy, whatever, you know, the line is, however you want to say it. And it's really disheartening, you know, to see how effective this propaganda has been against the American people, by our own government. That, you know, so many people in my life, I feel like it's really hard to have any kind of conversations about this stuff because there's just so many layers of bullshit you have to cut through, you know. Sorry, excuse my language, but there's so many layers, you know, of just censorship and propaganda and everything you have to cut through to get to a really meaningful conversation. And so, you know, there's a ton of people in this country who are extremely comfortable, and, you know, in the media, obviously, the intelligence agencies have their influence there pretty much anywhere you look. And so there's this really extreme comfort with dismissing any and all criticism these days as a threat to democracy, you know, whatever you want to call it. And you're right, Lori, that I think, you know, Trump was the beginning of that Trump just like melted people's brains. You know, people could not accept that. They're like, you know, if that guy's up there, then we have to throw the whole system out, you know, principles be gone, and let's just, you know, crack down on this because this is a, you know, threat to democracy, whatever you want to call it. And I hosted a space the other night about the Republican debate, like what was missed in the Republican debate. And one of the things that came up was that they didn't talk about, you know, this issue of free speech that is being, the Biden administration is really, really egregious on. I mean, I've been horrified by, you know, the Biden administration of just how totalitarian this administration has been. And so, you know, Kennedy right now is the one at the front of this whole thing where, you know, he's getting censored, but so many average people look at that and recognize that, you know, if they can censor him, in this case, a major candidate, you know, they have the power to censor anybody. And that's really, really concerning. You know, for me as 22, I'm in college right now. I am scared about what kind of country I'm going to grow up in. And so I'm loving the Kennedy campaign. I'm, you know, loving everything that's being said here. Nick, I'm really glad that you were helping to get Cornel West in this race too. I think he's a really powerful voice, and glad that he's able to contribute as well. I did have one question I wanted to ask for the panel, you know, Anita or anyone who's involved in the campaign, talking about, you know, this censorship, like how we kind of cut through it, where it's really, really difficult on social media. But I've been seeing, you know, Kennedy do a lot of interviews with local media, like local news. And I know, you know, there isn't a lot of that left in the country, frankly. And, you know, a lot of what is left is just kind of owned by bigger media organizations, bigger corporations. But I was wondering, you know, is that kind of has that been a successful way to cut through some of this censorship? Like, has local media been a good way to get the message out?
Anita, would you like to take that question?
Yes. I think there's been some great interviews done with locals. And I think it's, number one, it supports the locals. I remember one of the first interviews he did after he announced was with the Jackman brothers up in New Hampshire. That was a great interview. And it's still circulated to this day. One of the things that we're worried about is right now he's being he's certainly out with a lot of the media at the corporate media at the 11 p.m. news. And, when he does events, there's like little snippets of a minute or two that he came into town from the corporate media. We're just concerned that once the Democratic Party starts marching out, their candidates, that the corporate media is just going to stop all talk of him altogether. So this is where the independent media will be able to step up and do these longer interviews and in-depth interviews with our candidate. So that's kind of some of what I see or what I anticipate will happen next.
Yeah, if I could just jump back in there, I think you're completely on the right track with that. We're definitely at this turning point right now in the country where, the mainstream media just does not have the same, number one, their credibility is long gone.
Yeah, I agree with
Group
that.
of people that are
sure.
still watching. Was I losing
And
connection there?
Holden,
But
you brought up yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, yeah, I was pretty much
ahead,
done.
Holden.
Just saying, the independent media is a lot bigger already than most people recognize.
That's right. That's right. And, I wanted to also add to that because I spent most of my life working in local media, local radio, just for, the market where I live. And, it's actually the only media left on television and on radio and newspapers that where real journalism is still alive and well. Local stations are the key. And I wish that Stephanie Spear, press secretary for the Kennedy 24 campaign, could be with us in this space tonight. She was invited. We have lots of questions, and we'd love to hear her input about the Kennedy campaign's media strategy to get around social media censorship roadblocks. And one of the best ways to do that is through speaking to local TV stations, local radio stations, local newspapers. And Kennedy's been doing a lot of that. And actually, that's one of the things mentioned in this lawsuit that I wanted to bring up. One of the very first video that YouTube removed was on March 3rd of this year when Kennedy spoke at St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire at the Institute of Politics. And Manchester Public Television posted a video of that speech. YouTube removed it immediately, like the same day. And it's mentioned here in the lawsuit that Kennedy is has filed against Google and YouTube. And of course, we all know that, or you may know that YouTube has not only removed that video, YouTube has removed videos from the official Team Kennedy channel, the official campaign channel on YouTube, has also removed several of my videos. As you know, they banned my channel completely. I'm banned forever. Just for talking about Kennedy, just for covering his campaign. Kennedy did a big interview with Joe Rogan. That was removed. It's mentioned here in this lawsuit. That was posted on June 17th, taken down the same day. An interview with Jordan Peterson that Kennedy did was also taken down, I think the next day, off of YouTube. YouTube has censored interviews that Kennedy has done with Mike Tyson, the boxer, who's a personal friend of Kennedy, Luke Radowski and Tim Pool. Let's see, Kim Iverson. The list is long. I have to really think of how many have been removed at this point. Dark Journalist had an interview with Kennedy removed. And mainly they go after larger channels, of course, because as my friend Matthew Tower said, who's also had episodes of his podcast about RFK removed, they tend to go after the larger channels because, of course, more people are going to hear the message on a channel with a lot of subscribers. But they also go after the little guys, too. And that's important to point out. You don't have to be a large channel to get censored by YouTube. And I invited journalists tonight, both large and small, who've had their channels stricken for political speech, not always about Kennedy. Some of them have been censored for Kennedy. But while I'm at it, while I have the lawsuit in front of me, I want to read you some really shocking things that are in the judge's ruling. Earlier, we talked about how on the 23rd of this month, this past week, Kennedy and his lawyers were in court in California trying to push this lawsuit forward, and they had asked the judge to grant a restraining order, which would prevent Google and YouTube from censoring him and the campaign while the campaign is ongoing until we can get into court next year with this case. And of course, the judge denied that request for a restraining order. And I wanted to read you because this judge, let me tell you, you can tell already this judge doesn't like Kennedy. We can already tell how this judge is going to rule. Frankly, I would be surprised if Kennedy prevails. And in fact, she says in her ruling that he is unlikely to prevail. The judge seems very, very skeptical of his case. And certainly she feels that this case will not prevail on the merits. She writes in her ruling this week, in seeking out a preliminary injunction based on First Amendment grounds, the moving party bears the initial burden of making a colorable claim that its First Amendment rights have been infringed or are threatened with infringement, at which point the burden shifts to the government to justify the restriction. And the judge writes that the plaintiff's First Amendment claim is unlikely to succeed on the merits because YouTube and Google are private entities and not state actors. She writes, Kennedy alleges that Google and YouTube, collectively Google, violated his First Amendment rights when it removed 2 videos of him from YouTube. Now, right there, the judge is being disingenuous because, as I just detailed for you, much more than 2 videos have been removed. The judge is trying to minimize this and say, they only took down 2 videos, right? It's not a big deal. It is a big deal. They've taken down at least 20 videos that I know of. They have canceled and punished journalists, countless journalists, for covering Mr. Kennedy, put strikes against their channels, demonetized their channels, which, by the way, is how they make a living. You know, once they demonetize your channel, if you have a big YouTube channel, that's literally what pays your rent. That's what puts food on your table. So this is a lot more than just 2 videos, but only 2 videos were referenced, or 3, in this legal complaint. So the judge is only going on those 2 videos. Now, it says that those videos were removed based on YouTube's policies related to COVID-19 medical misinformation and vaccine misinformation, which is also disingenuous. I'm catching this judge in so many outright falsehoods in her ruling. I can tell you from my own experience and the experience of other colleagues I've spoken to, that when we get a strike on YouTube for covering Kennedy, every strike I got was for medical misinformation, even in videos where we did not discuss COVID at all. At all. We didn't talk about vaccines. We just talked about the campaign. We were just giving news of where he was and what he said. And he didn't even say anything about the darn vaccines. But YouTube would give us a strike saying that we were putting out medical misinformation. So it's clear that any video with Kennedy's name in the description, in the title, or his picture, even in the thumbnail, gets automatically flagged by the YouTube AI as medical misinformation, and then it's forwarded up the food chain for review and a strike. And I have appealed those strikes every time I got one, every time I was punished by YouTube for anything about Kennedy, I would appeal it. And within seconds, they didn't even take time to review the video. It's supposed to be reviewed by a human. When you go through the appeal process, they're supposed to look at the video, find out what was actually offensive or wrong, and get back to you. But it's not reviewed by a human because there's no way you can review a 2-hour video in seconds. And so we would get our reply back from YouTube, some automated email within seconds saying your appeal has been denied. And the judge writes here, plaintiff further asserts that because YouTube policies are exclusively guided by local health authorities, therefore YouTube is a state actor for purposes of holding a private entity responsible for the deprivation of First Amendment rights. And the judge says neither the case law nor the record suggests that Kennedy's First Amendment claim is likely to succeed on the merits. This is just unbelievable. The court asks whether the alleged constitutional violation was caused by, quote, the exercise of some right or privilege created by the state, or a rule of conduct imposed by the state, or by a person for whom the state is responsible. If the answer is yes, the court then considers whether the party charged with the deprivation is a person who may fairly be said to be a state actor. Basically what this judge is arguing here, I won't bore you with a bunch of legalese, but essentially the judge is saying that Kennedy so far has not shown that Google or YouTube is a state actor under the nexus or the joint action tests. And the reason that Kennedy can't prove it is because there hasn't been any discovery allowed in the case yet. That's where the proof is. That's when he can get documents from Google, from YouTube, showing their communications back and forth with the government, with the FBI, with the CIA, with the White House, with the CDC, with the FDA. And that will not be allowed. Discovery in this case will not begin until after the 2024 election in November, mid-November of next year, which will essentially nullify the case and make it a moot point. And that's how I expect the judge will eventually rule if this case ever gets to court. Again, the court date when the trial and jury selection begins will be March of 2025, my friends, 2 months after the next president is already sworn in. So it really won't even matter at that point. And I guarantee you the scheduling of this case is absolutely deliberate. And that's why they're dragging their feet and they're dragging this out. And they don't want to let discovery occur until after the election. And they don't want to let him into court to prove his case until it's just too late. And it really won't matter much if the court doesn't just nullify it and say that the whole thing is moot by the time it gets to court. Now, in this case on page 6, in the ruling that the judge released last week, she writes, per its COVID-19 medical misinformation policy and vaccine misinformation policies, community guidelines and terms of service, Google took down 3 videos of Kennedy. Once again, this judge thinks that only 3 videos have ever been removed, which is completely wrong. Number 1, a video of Kennedy giving a speech at St. Anselm College regarding the number of vaccines American children take that was uploaded to YouTube by Manchester Public Television, the Joe Rogan interview, and the Jordan Peterson interview. Now, in support of its state action theory, Kennedy produces evidence from the Missouri versus Biden case, including emails between government officials and Google personnel. These communications between government officials and Google concern requests for information to YouTube about trends related to vaccine misinformation and YouTube seeking information related to science-backed responses to 2 medical misinformation claims. And in one of these emails concerning vaccination hesitation, a White House official stated that, quote, this is a concern that is shared at the highest, and I mean highest, levels of the White House. However, the judge says, this is insufficient to deem YouTube's decisions to be deemed that of the state, yet alone part of a conspiracy to censor speech. There is no evidence, the judge says, before the court that of any of the identified government officials who are not parties to this case demanded that Google adopt a COVID medical misinformation or vaccine misinformation policy. Moreover, there is no evidence before the court that government officials communicated with Google regarding Kennedy at all. Now, we know they did because we have gotten that information out of the Missouri versus Biden case. There is an email, literally January 21st, 2021, the day after Biden was sworn in, where they sent an email to Facebook saying, shut that guy up, take that guy down. And so, again, this judge is being incredibly disingenuous, is ignoring the available evidence that Kennedy has presented, and I would argue that the judge is doing it on purpose.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.